Welcome to Weekly Briefing. I'm John Hines. So sometimes covering Congress is like trying to fit 10 pounds of news into a 5-pound bag. There's just not enough room for everything. But that does not mean that what goes unreported or underreported is not important. And that's what happened this week on Capitol Hill. It was in the form of a hearing in the House Administration Committee. And but for the fact that so much was happening elsewhere on Capitol Hill, it would have or should have been on front pages across the country. As you may know, Georgia Congressman Barry Loudermilk is leading an investigation for the GOP into the events of January 6th. And this week, the former Capitol Hill police chief, Steve Sund, appeared for the first time before a House committee. In this case, the House Administration Committee's panel investigating January 6th. So it's been more than 2.5 years since that fateful day, and the guy who was in charge of security at the Capitol on that day had never spoken to a House committee about what happened. I don't know about you, but I thought that was kind of an interesting factoid. It became even more interesting as I listened to what he had to say. And what he laid out in his testimony was the fact that the former House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, was the reason Chief Sund's request for National Guard backup was denied. Chief Sund first asked for the National Guard backup on January 3rd in anticipation of protests and demonstrations planned for January 6th. He made the request for additional personnel to his superiors, who denied him, mentioning, quote, optics, unquote. He later learned that the reason he was denied was that, quote, it was a non-starter for Pelosi. The person who probably explains it better than I do is the chairman of the investigating subcommittee, Mr. Loudermilk. What does that mean up the chain of command with regard to the National Guard and their ability to be on the Capitol January 6th?
Right. Well, the current rules, the law states that any additional assistance, such as from the National Guard, has to be requested by the Capitol Police Board. The Capitol Police Board consisted then of Paul Irving, Michael Stenger with the Senate, Paul Irving with the House, the architect of the Capitol, who was not here that day, the former, I may say former architect of the Capitol now, and the chief of police is a non-voting member. So he needed those three to concur to bring in the National Guard. The Sergeant-at-Arms of the House is basically nominated by the Speaker and is voted on by the entire House, but functionally reports to the Speaker. And so when the term up the chain is used, the only person up the chain from the Sergeant-at-Arms is the Speaker of the House. And so we know that there was regular communications between Mr. Irving and Speaker Pelosi. So when the many references to going up the chain, for instance, with Paul Irving saying, I need to run this up the chain, obviously he's talking about the Speaker or someone in the Speaker's office.
And running it up the chain, that was a significant delay in the National Guard being here. And indeed, I guess one of the times running up the chain, there was no response or a very slow response?
It was very slow response, well over an hour. And this was after that things have already started to fall apart here. Was well over an hour. Even at one part, when he was on the phone with the National Guard, again, trying to get the request, when they finally got the Capitol Police to approve the request. He's on the phone with the Department of Defense. Shots have actually been fired in the Capitol at that point, but still the word optics came up again within the Department of Defense, where there was a recommendation to not send the National Guard because of the optics of it. There was also concern of optics. We had the civil disturbance units of Capitol Police positioned. These are basically the riot police, right? They were in position outside the Capitol. However, because of optics, they were not given their riot gear. Those were told that the riot gear needed to remain in the buses, which were supposedly close by. But, you know, when you're facing a crowd coming in, it's not feasible just tell them, hey, can you take a time out while I go get my riot gear, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was so much emphasis on optics that this is where we talk about the politicization of the Capitol Police, is the undue influence from elected officials using their influence to cause the Capitol Police to take some action or not take an action.
Going back, I think January 3rd, Chief Sund said that he first broached the idea of having potentially National Guard ready to go, and the response there was unenthusiastic. Who was he talking to, and what was the response? And once again, there was some mention, I believe, of the speaker not being enthusiastic or being concerned about optics, right?
Yeah, that was a conversation he had with Paul Irvin on the 3rd, understanding that there was going to be. Now, this is the point where they realized that there is going to be a lot of people here at the White House and possibly around the Capitol. Permits for protests had already been awarded for basically every permit area around the Capitol. The intelligence was coming in. I mean, they look at things such as hotel rooms, how many hotel rooms have been rented, airline tickets, and that type of thing. So they knew there was going to be a large gathering at the White House and potentially here at the Capitol. Out of that concern, Chief Sund went to Paul Irving and brought up the idea of readying the National Guard and have them there. Michael Irvin said, let me run that up the chain. He went and talked to Michael Singer, or Paul Irvin recommended he go talk to Michael Singer, the Sergeant-at-Arms at the Senate. By the time he was able to talk to the Sergeant-at-Arms at the Senate, Paul Irvin had already alerted him that he was coming. And so they basically, the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms said, let's call the National Guard and talk to them about it, which they did, and the National Guard recommended against bringing them out. So multiple times he wanted to bring assistance in, multiple times he was denied until it was too late.
We also know, I think you have mentioned that you know that there were plainclothes, either Metropolitan Police or federal agents. I'm not sure if that's ever been determined which way it was federal or Metropolitan Police, but there are plainclothes officers here. What did he say about the procedure as far as notifying the Capitol Police Chief about that, if there are plainclothes officers who are going to be on the Capitol grounds?
Yeah, he said that he wasn't aware of any plainclothes officers who would be on Capitol grounds. Now, he being a former leader within the Metropolitan Police, and he started sensing how large the crowd would be, as well as knowing that the National Guard was not going to be sent. He called some of his friends there and said, can you ready some of your folks to come to the Capitol if we need them? So there were units, that's why they were able to get here so quickly, that were staged just off Capitol grounds, ready to come in. However, he was never given notification, nor did he request any plainclothes officers. We do know, of course, we don't know the timeline. We know what time that he enacted the mutual aid agreement, which allows them to come onto the Capitol grounds. But we do know that there were Metropolitan Police officers in plainclothes. We do have their GoPro video from their electronic surveillance units that were in the crowd, and at one point, actually, one of them appears to be encouraging protesters to go into the Capitol. And so, obviously, Chief Sund finds that type of action very offensive. So we're looking into that. We're digging deeper into those. But one of the questions that we have is, what was the justification for plainclothes officers? As Chief Sund said, that's not surprising that they would have some. It's not that unusual, especially in a large gathering. But if they were having that number, and we do know that there were some federal agents within the crowd, don't know if they were on Capitol grounds or not.
So that last part about the plainclothes police is interesting. During his testimony, Sund made the point that the required protocol is that any agency that would have been sending plainclothes officers should have notified him. None did so. Yet we know that at least the D.C. Metropolitan Police had plainclothes officers there, and we've all seen reliable reports of plainclothes federal officers who were there too, although none of the three-letter agencies that would have sent them have admitted to doing so. Yet Chief Sund was not told about any of that. The more we find out, the more questions we all have. Stay tuned.